Yes, you have a question.
Rabbi, do you believe in the Trinity?
Do I believe in the doctrine of the Trinity? No. No, I don't. I should just, one point should make clear is I'm an Orthodox rabbi, just so you understand. So, as an Orthodox Jew, we believe in the Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew Bible. And I'll just make this point because I think you probably have a follow-up question. But I want to just explain a little bit about what it means to be a Jew and like how we think. Like, what do you guys, why do Jews believe what you believe? Now, we're really important to Christians. Why? Because Christians base their faith on Judaism. We're not Hindus. We're the mother faith, right? So Judaism is very important to Christians because Christians believe that their faith is founded on the Jewish faith. And in fact, the Christian Bible is very clear that the Jews get their information directly from God. Listen to them. It may say that the Pharisees or rabbis, they don't behave right, but the information is from God. Matthew 23, verse 1 and 2. The Pharisees and scribes sit in Moses' seat. Whatever they tell you, you must do. If you read Romans, Paul says the same thing, that to the Jews were given all the oracles. So I want to explain this idea. The earliest Christians certainly believed that it was given to the Jewish people. We use the Hebrew Bible as a measuring stick. That's how we think. Do you know how our heads work? You know, scripture is called a canon. You ever heard that term, canon? You know what the word canon means? It means a what? A reed, a measuring stick, right? Well, why is it called a reed? What a strange name for a holy book. Well, it means that we use the Hebrew Bible to measure every claim, every assertion, every philosophical idea. So what we do is we say, okay, we have a philosophical claim, a theological assertion, and we do is, okay, let's take the Jewish Bible, we hold it up here, and we use that to measure every claim. If it is consistent with the Hebrew scriptures, we're very interested. You have our attention. If it is not consistent with the Jewish Bible, so we reject it. You know, there's a joke. Why did God invent Mormons? So Christians would know how Jews feel. Okay, it's not that funny, but it's interesting. What happens is that what we're doing essentially is we're looking at every claim, so say take the doctrine of the Trinity. It's a central claim of the Christian religious faith. And what we do as Jews is something a little bit different than other people who are not Christians. So for Muslims who don't believe in the Trinity, they're going to want to go to the New Testament and say, you see, the New Testament doesn't believe in the Trinity at all. They're going to want to go say the Trinity is a later development of the church. This may or may not be true, but that would be the approach of an agnostic, of a Muslim. It is not our approach. It is of no interest to us. What we do is we look at the doctrine of the Trinity, and it's not just the word Trinity, which was created by a man named Tertullian, a church father born in 165 from Carthage. You know what Carthage is? It's the African continent in the Roman Empire. In 197, he became a Christian. And certainly what Christians believe today was fully cleared up in the Council of Nicaea in 325. But so the answer to the question is, it's not that we don't believe in the Trinity. The answer is that we believe in one God and no other. What's your first name?
Roman.
I was teaching at Duke University. I don't know if you heard of Duke, but they have a fairly well-known divinity school. It's Methodist divinity school. And what happened is we had such a big crowd, and actually I came in early rather than late. Just the opposite. And we had a crowd of students, young men and women, divinity students that were there. And then a lot of undergraduate students came as well. And I asked the students, if you were God, And you wanted to convey to everyone who would read this Bible that there is one God and there's no other. It's one alone and no other. What would you put in the Bible to make sure that everyone who reads it would make no mistake about this? Do you understand? Like, if you were God, like, what would you put in there to make sure that anyone who read this would be clear that there is one God who is the creator and the first cause of all? And he's not just the God of creation, but he's the God of history, and he loves you. And he shares his glory with no one. What would you put in there? And these young men and women came up with some great suggestions. And there was a blackboard behind me. I do it with you tonight. And one fellow raised his hand. He said, well, I would have this. And I write it down on the blackboard. There's only one God. There is no one else besides him. And then someone else raised their hand. They had a suggestion. I had the whole blackboard full of ideas of what you'd put in there. And when it was full, I said, now watch this. And next to every statement, I put a verse from Isaiah 44, from Deuteronomy chapter 6. So just to understand that from a Jewish perspective, what we do is we just look at Scripture. And that's why it was so important to me when I said, well, what does this university believe? That what we do is we look at the Hebrew Bible. I'll be honest with you. I just want to be frank. It's not important to us if someone is having a spiritual experience. It's not relevant. Because we believe that every religion could produce spiritual experiences. Here in the Philippines, people are meeting the Virgin Mary every day. And the same thing is happening in Portugal, and the same thing is happening in South America. It's not happening in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, but it's happening in a lot of countries. It's not relevant to us. People will tell me that becoming a Hindu changed my life and I don't do drugs anymore. That's not relevant to us. God spoke to me last night, and he told me that I should become a Mormon. Not relevant. What is the only thing that's relevant is Scripture. So what we do is we look at the claim, and then we look at the Hebrew Bible, and we just say, does it match? If it matches, we cherish it. If it doesn't, it becomes radioactive for us. So I want to be. Just a question for you. If I have to pick being politically correct, or do you want political correct, or do you want me just to say it? All right. So that's really how we live our lives. It's okay. Now, did you have a follow-up question?
Well, that's quite relevant because it's the prerequisite.
What's that?
First question, because the follow-up question to my first question is this: how can you reconcile Trinity and monotheism?
I can't.
Reconcile.
They were, one of the interesting things was that in the early church, I'm not trying to sell you a book. You couldn't even get it here. So I have a whole chapter on this. In the early church, there was a great effort to reconcile how could Jesus be a God, but also be man. This was a very big issue for the early church. And, one of the funny things, well, it's not funny, but the church fathers did not like the Jews like the Filipinos do. They didn't like us at all. And they said some really terrible things about us. They wrote whole books, like Tertullian and Origen. The name of the book was Against the Jews. I mean, they really were not crazy about us. But I want to share this with you, and that is, whatever they said about us was nothing compared to what some Christians said about other Christians. Those were much worse. And you see it today where you have different denominations where groups say, well, that's not a real Christian. This is a real Christian. That's not a real, that's a false gospel. That really went on a lot in the early church. There were attempts of how do you solve Trinitarianism, or the idea that Jesus was God with monotheism. This was a massive issue in the early church. Now, far be it from me as a rabbi to teach you early Christian history, but I could sweep it through really quickly for you because there were movements that tried to reconcile these ideas. There was a really early church father, his name was Ignatius. He said that Jesus was God, but he didn't try to explain it in any way. We have what's called higher Christology, which means in the Christian Bible, there are certain texts that have Jesus held in a very high position. The most famous of these texts is what's called the Prologue of John. It's John chapter 1, verse 1 through 18. That's called higher Christology. Now, here what Jesus is spoken of as a God. But what you also find in the Christian text is that Jesus is getting all of his power from God, and he is the God, the Father is greater than I am. We find that in the book of John as well, in chapter 14. We have Jesus healing people and forgiving sin, but saying in John 5:30 that I can't do anything of my own power, only of the one who sent me. So in the Christian Bible, what you have, even just John alone, without anything else, that's the fourth gospel, you have enormous tension of what exactly did the author mean. So in the second century, you had people trying to assemble this and work this out. You had people who believed that maybe the Father and Jesus were simply two manifestations of the exact same thing. So I am a father, I'm also a son. I have parents, I have children. I'm also a grandfather. I have 4 grandchildren. So I'm a grandfather, I'm a father, I'm a child, I'm all these things, but I'm still the same person. This is we call today called modalism, which meant that there was the Father and the Son, but they were the same. They were not. There was no distinction. The problem is that did not fit well in the Christian Bible, where Jesus is very clearly portrayed as subordinate to the Father. Tertullian did not like this at all. In Tertullian's works, he fought this heavily, and it was from this modalism, of responding to modalism, that he came up with what is not the orthodoxy today, but something close to it. And that is, there's a separation of persons. But Tertullian still believed that ultimately the Father was superior to the Son. There was a point that the Son did not exist and the Father did exist. And Tertullian was later considered a heretic for this. So he was honored, but not a saint, because his idea was not as developed as it was later on. Tertullian said, you have the voice from heaven, this is my son whom I am well pleased. So you are my son, as in the book of Mark. In Matthew, it's this is my son. But who is he talking to? Who is Jesus praying to in John 17? So this is going to be worked out. Origen is going to make a very strong attempt at this. By the time we get to the 4th century, Christians are clashing over this. All Christians believe that Jesus was a God, but the question is to what extent of a God he was. If Jehovah's Witnesses tell you that at Nicaea they were trying to figure out if Jesus was God or not, just tell them they're not telling you the truth. That's not the case. By the time we get to the Council of Nicaea, with Constantine, who's the emperor of Rome, who wanted to unify the empire under one religion, one emperor, and one doctrine, at that point, everybody present believed that Jesus was some sort of God, but to what extent? In the Greek language, it was one letter I in the word homoousia. That was it. And it was ultimately hammered out what Christians now embrace as the Trinity. But I don't think it's for me as a rabbi to really, that's for your Christian professors to work through with you. But this was an issue that Christians struggled with. And to this day, I think that much of the disagreement among Christians is exactly of the nature of Jesus. For Jewish people, we look at Numbers 23:19. It's really simple. God is not a man. He will not lie. He is not human. He's not mortal. He'll never change his mind. That shuts the door on the doctrine of the Trinity for Jews.
Adon olam asher malach בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארת בתפארה. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא, לעת נשא בחפצה כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא, ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא, והוא היה והוא עובר והוא יהיה בתפארה. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא, לעת נשא בחפצה